Welcome to the Flore Fantasy and Sci-Fi Lore. Right now, we are still in Fallout. In this episode, we are going to be covering the Brotherhood of Steel, its origins in the U.S. military, when they secede from the U.S. military, and why no one comes for them after they make this announcement. We are going to talk about Roger Maxon, who founds the Brotherhood of Steel, and his decision to look at the fall of Rome and the rise of medieval knights to help bridge that period of chaos and how that impacts how we will shape and build the Brotherhood of Steel. We will talk about their mission and their quest that comes from the Canticle of Leibowitz, and the big question, along with many others that we'll address, which is, how do you stop the rise of technology that leads to the destruction of mankind, which eventually leads to the rise of technology and the destruction of mankind? How do you stop that cycle? So, if that is what you're interested in, this is the episode for you. Roll the intro.
Do you remember the first story that was so spellbinding it drove you to break the rules and stay up all night to keep reading, keep watching, keep playing? So good, you forgot your life and lived there?
So good, the moment it ended, you asked yourself, what next?
Welcome to the Flore. Our goal is to take you back, take you deeper, to explore and understand more, and relive that childlike wonder.
Join us as we dive deep into humanity's greatest stories, no matter how they are told, through books, movies, television, even games.
One of us does an in-depth research on the topic. One of us is familiar with the topic.
And one of us knows nothing. So the right questions will always be asked and addressed for anyone coming into the topic, regardless of how much you know.
Enjoy another world, another adventure, another spellbinding story. Join us on the Flore. We are still in the world of Fallout. This is a shorter episode focusing on a single faction, and we're going to talk about one of the most common factions that you will encounter in Fallout, no matter where you play, and that is the Brotherhood of Steel. So we did mention way back in our first introduction episode that Tim Kaine was reading through all of the Hugo winners for inspiration for his world as he was building it. And Eli came across a certain book on that list that was a very direct inspiration for the Brotherhood of Steel.
Yes, that book is called A Canticle for Leibowitz. And I'll get into that later. I want to first just cover the origin story of the Brotherhood of Steel, and then I'll talk about the inspiration for their ideology, and that is that book. So, okay. We'll first go over the origins of the Brotherhood of Steel in Fallout. So, during the war that ends it all, it's the American and the Chinese are battling it out in Alaska for the oil sands, because this is one of the last oil resources known in the world.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll, just to dip our toe really quick, we will do a whole thing on this, but essentially we did mention that the big split with Fallout in our world is they go heavy into nuclear energy, and they go from fission to fusion, and they start powering everything in it. Then there is a massive shortage of uranium and the materials they need. And so the world ends up going back to oil after it's been nuclear for a long time. And then there is a massive oil shortage. And this shortage kind of kicks off the big war. Now, Fallout is originally made in 1997. And so Tim had made the choice not to make the big villain, the Russians, because they collapsed in the 80s. And so he wanted a world power that hadn't collapsed, but was still kind of there in the Cold War. And because the Chinese had embraced communism and allied themselves with the Soviet Union, he chose them as kind of the big counterpoint to the United States going forward after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that's how we end up with the Chinese versus the Americans in this final battle for the last oil in the world.
That's right. That's right. So it was also known as the Resource War. And during this war, the Chinese are using bioweapons against the Americans. And so the Americans develop the power armor to battle this.
Oh.
And this is when power armor is developed and being produced. And also somebody in power armor is strong enough that they can take down a tank, right? So they are, if you play the games, power armor is the boss's knees.
Yeah. In-game stuff, but like getting your hands on a set of power armor is just like one of the great moments in any Fallout game. Be like, yes, power armor, caught it.
All right.
I will never forget the first time I saw a member of the Brotherhood of Steel in that power armor and be like, I want one. And I fought them, and they killed me. And then I had to find a different way to get it. I was like, I wonder if I could just kill them and take it. Did not.
Now, which means it's really good, right?
Well, more than power armor, they've also got great weapons to go with it.
True.
You know, like they're the old kid.
Walking up to these guys wearing rubber tires for armor. We got a mechanical gun, and then he pulls out an energy weapon, and you're not even sure if it's a human in there. Yeah. So another thing the U.S. military was working on to battle the bioweapons is they start to develop the forced evolutionary virus, the FEV, that we've talked about before. This creates the super mutants and whatnot. So anyways, this was a government program where it'll go in and change your DNA, and they're hoping that they can do it to where they can make soldiers immune to the biological weapons. But because they were worried that this technology would get stolen from them, they kind of put it into a secret project. Put all these scientists together, get all their families, and then also give them their own military team to protect them. Very similar to the Manhattan Project.
Yeah. And I imagine it was like they took their inspiration from that. How was Manhattan Project set up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then, so this is Manhattan Project Part 2, if you will.
2.0. Yeah. Instead of radiating them, we're going to radiate us.
And it's going to work. So everything's fine and dandy when they're infecting single cells and start testing on animals, until they start testing the virus out on humans. They're testing out on prisoners of war. And that's when things start to go south. The military team turn on the scientists because of what they're seeing and what's going on there. And they weren't told that they were going to do human testing. And so there is a mutiny. The guy in charge, Colonel Spindle, he ends up just shooting himself when the mutiny begins. The military men start to interrogate the scientists, all of them ending in an execution because of how unhappy they are with this. And eventually, they end up sending out a message via radio telling the U.S. government that they are seceding from the U.S. government.
Oh, wow.
And there is no response. And no one comes for them. And this is because the bombs were about to drop in 3 days. But luckily, the base secret was successful, and they don't get hit by bombs. And after the bombs have dropped, they feel like they were just kind of missed, like overstepped, just didn't get seen, but that the Chinese would come through and bomb their location. And so he tells everyone to prepare to leave. There's a fallout bunker down south, the Lost Hills bunker. And so 5 days after the bombs drop, they go and they test for radiation. It's not overwhelming. So they go and make this expedition south to the Lost Hills bunker. Now, already the world is in complete disarray. They run into raiders and things. And, the guys in power armor do just fine. But it's their families that are not protected by the power armor that, they lose a lot of numbers Exodus down there.
Wow.
Also, the guy who becomes their leader, Roger Maxon, Captain Roger Maxon, he's going to end up being the leader of this group that will later become the Brotherhood of Steel. So they make their way down there. Maxon's wife dies on the way, and they lose a lot of people. But they end up getting to the bunker and settling down. And Maxon sees that everyone is falling into depression. And he sees that his people need hope now more than ever, right? The world is burned. They've lost everything, lost everyone, except for the few that have survived, right? And it's just looking really grim and dark. And so he then creates the model for the Brotherhood of Steel. And he uses the fall of the Roman Empire as this model, right? And that after the empire falls, there was a need for these knights to protect what was left.
Right.
And so he uses this kind of pretense to set up his model for the Brotherhood of Steel. And some ideologies for them to follow as well. So in creating it, one of their main prerogatives is to preserve the knowledge and technologies needed to restart civilization when the time comes. As well as to keep the means to destroy humanity out of humanity's hands. All right, these are the two major things, right? Like, let's keep our technology and everything, but if this is something that could cause an apocalypse, humans need to not have it.
Right. You we already did apocalypse once. We don't want apocalypse 2. Still haven't recovered from apocalypse 1.
Yeah. So with also creating the Brotherhood of Steel and the new ranking system and these ideologies, it's helping let his people let go of the past, right? These are all ex-military people, and being a part of this Brotherhood meant that they were no longer part of this U.S. military, and no one can just come along and try to pull rank against them.
Because they're not the U.S. military anymore. Right.
Right. They are now the Brotherhood. And really kind of define themselves and also giving them a purpose in this new world. And this particular quest comes from the book, A Canticle for Leibowitz. This is written in, so this is a real world book, right? One of the inspirations for Fallout, and is very much they read this book and they're like, this would be a really good way to let's pull this into
this faction, faction based on this,
So written in 1959 by Walter M. Miller Jr. And one of the big stories, so like the story starts out with, it's after bombs have dropped. And everything is wasteland, and it's long enough that people don't even know what a fallout shelter is anymore.
Wow.
The guy who finds a fallout shelter, and there's a manual for it, and the guy who writes it is Leibowitz, right? And he becomes a saint, right? They worship him like a saint. And, when the guy's reading the manual, he's like, oh no, I've never ran into a fallout beast before. Hope I don't run into one of those. This sounds really bad. And so it's this religion that persisted through the apocalypse, and then as people have lived after it and are kind of rebuilding the world, kind of asking themselves, what do we need to preserve in case this happens again, or what do we need to gather to rebuild our society? And the book overall asks this question of, what if humanity gets caught in this loop of, you have technological development till we have the ability to destroy ourselves, bomb ourselves back into the Stone Age, technological development till we have the ability to destroy ourselves, and we do this again and over and again, right? And what would you want to preserve? for this future. So is it more important to hold on to the technologies to rebuild civilization, or is it more important to hold on to our moralities? Essentially saying that our technology grows faster than our morality can keep up with it. And that is why we end up destroying ourselves. Because by the time we can destroy ourselves, we're not ready to ask the question, should we be doing this?
Right. It's the Jurassic Park thing. You were so concerned with whether or not you could, you never stopped to think if you should.
Right. And that's kind of what this book is known for, is, if we can develop a way to destroy ourselves, how do we hold back?
And I think the central question here comes out of just like the need for survival of war, right? Particularly, before World War, I guess the European wars are different, right? In the early wars across the world, you lost the war, you lost your country, right? You now were under new rulership, right? That was it. But somewhere in the 1800s, Europe starts trying to balance powers, right? There have been so many wars, then they're just sick of it. And so anytime a great war ends, they try to just keep the status quo. Let's just not upset this ship, And so by the time we get to the end of World War I, very few countries change hands at the end of that war, right? The big exception being the Ottoman Empire. And by the end of World War II, right, even Germany, who everybody is blaming for this fantastic mess, is kept as a country because they're like, status quo. We want status quo, right? Let's not create a situation where another war can break out. But there is still the mentality of war that when you're in it, you are fighting for survival. And therefore anything goes. And even the atomic bomb, we don't develop that in peacetime. We develop that in the time of war. Be like, hey, we're fighting for survival. Anything goes. Let's make the weapon that can destroy the world, because then they won't destroy us.
Right. And some people would argue that's a bad philosophy to live by.
But again, war forces you into that corner, right? War is about just getting to tomorrow. It is not about the next 10 years. Yeah. And it forces you to make those kind of choices, right?
Just some details for this book, if you want to get into it. It's great as this post-apocalyptic book. It's broken up into 3 parts. One is this early kind of humans been bombed to the Stone Age area, and then one is 600 years later, and then one is much farther later, and they've are achieving space travel again. But it does kind of point out this cycle thing, and this is a story where it's all just about these people in this monastery, right? So it's not this epic adventure where you got heroes and things. It's more just people talking back and forth, debating about certain philosophies and whatnot during these eras, and just debating more about it. So, if you're loving Fallout, that might be a fun one for you to go check out.
That is the origins of the Brotherhood of Steel, both in and outside the game.
So that's right. Hope you enjoyed it.
Catch you next time. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. We have mentioned in the past that if you go to the Patreon page, we have collections of all the different worlds and pieces of lore we have covered. For example, if you want everything we have ever done about Baldur's Gate, from the invention of D&D to Baldur's Gate 1, Baldur's Gate 2, Dark Alliance, all of that, you can find individual collections for all of those, or just one big collection containing all of Baldur's Gate or all of D&D. So everything we have covered, Eberron, Marvel, DC, Aliens, Xenoverse, Cyberpunk, Dune, and more. We have collections for each of those worlds. And I do want to mention that on the Patreon, the only thing behind the subscription is the Treasure Room content. Anything that has been released in the podcast for free is still free there. It is just a better organization of the information that the podcast app doesn't let us do. They are just a big list, and you just got to type in your search words. On the Patreon, there are tags for everything. You got fantasy, D&D, creature features, Baldur's Gate 1, Baldur's Gate 2, Dark Alliance, all of that. Just an individual tag for those episodes. And as I said, we do have collections just to make this as easy as possible to find what you're looking for. We have learned in the past that a lot of people who listen to the Flore, they're interested in one or two of the worlds, and they may check out one or two of the episodes when we switch worlds, but they're really just mostly interested in that. So we just want to consolidate everything you're looking for to make it just as easy as possible to access. So check that out just to make your life easier. And we are working at making sure you can download any of the free episodes there. So even if you're going to lose Wi-Fi or connection, you can get the episodes you want before that happens, or just not burn your data while you're traveling to and from work or whatever else is you do while you listen. And thank you. I hope you continue to enjoy the show.